Hey everyone, thanks for coming over. Glad that Andy gave me a warm-up so that now you're all ready. My name's Ken Robbins. I'm founder and CEO of Cloud Pegboard. We're a startup that's been about a year old, and our mission and really our passion is to help you keep up with AWS. As you saw during the keynote, if you saw it, there's a lot to keep up with. I've been using AWS since 2010 in various capacities. And the last year was what I've been working on was Cloud Pegboard, and started a year ago. But before that, I was running engineering at Novartis Research, where we moved from a fully on-prem environment to a Amazon first and a cloud first strategy. And there we onboarded in that practice 500 internal AWS users to our platform. And through that experience is where I saw some of the great frustration and cost, really, of having so many people trying to keep up with the rapid pace of innovation from AWS. And that was what actually inspired Cloud Pegboard, because this problem really is for every AWS user, not just with our former enterprise. We all know that as technologists, our ability to keep current is really what's going to make us successful. And if you're really successful, like our pal Scotty here, you get a face on a postage stamp. There aren't a lot of engineers I could find on postage stamps. And Scotty was able to solve any problem and always pull a rabbit out of his hat whenever he needed to, because he had this infinite knowledge of a massive amount of services, systems, capabilities, and was able to just solve any problem just when needed, because he had all the information he needed when he needed it. The problem is, most of us here are nonfiction, and so we need some other strategy. This is the way I think about AWS. Every time I come to reInvent, I'm giddy right about now after taking notes from all the keynote features. By Friday, it's kind of like a hangover. I'm thinking, oh my God, how am I going to keep up? And this is the picture that pops into my head, is I feel like I'm in the back of a race with a pack of cyclists in front of me, and I'm trying to keep up. Each one of them is just like another Amazon service team who are accelerating as fast as they can, which is good. We want them to do that. In fact, the metaphor doesn't really hold because they're at least on one common road and not going in many different directions. And we all have to keep up with that. Now imagine yourself in this back of the pack with me in this race, and these cyclists start spontaneously generating new racers, right? There's maybe, 10, 12 announcements in the last hour or two alone. And that's the unfair competition that we have. We want Amazon to innovate, but Amazon can scale horizontally and vertically at will with massive resources, but each one of you is an individual. You just keep getting diluted and diluted, and how are you going to keep up with that? One of the alternatives is you be overly specialized, but that's really not what the cloud is all about. It's about making use of this vast array of resources. So how do we make the most out of AWS and keep knowledge about what's going on so we really can use all these great features? So this choice is amazing. It allows us to do things we couldn't otherwise possibly do, and do them cheaper and faster than we would if we didn't have the cloud. But the cost, the trade-off that comes along with that is this information overload, which is quite real and really daunting and overwhelming to a lot of people. Maybe not to some others. To me, it is. So let's look at some of the hard data. This year alone, Amazon will make 2,000 announcements. And you can see it's been growing literally exponentially. There'll be about 2,500 blog posts. Those too are growing exponentially. Depending on how you define a service, there's maybe between 180, 230 services. No matter which measure you use, each one of them is growing exponentially. So Cloud Pegboard, one of the things we do is we have a catalog. We keep track of all this stuff. And these slides are out of date because they had to be frozen late October, but there's over 270 services and tools in our catalog, and by the end of this week, it'll be probably around 290. And that will continue to grow, especially through June. Quiets down a little bit, and it'll pick up again in November of next year as well. So it's constant growth, and that's just the number of services, and of course, then we have feature depth as well. If you don't do anything about this and you just sort of are passive, you'll just be blown with whatever way the wind's blowing, and you won't get to where your goals really are. In fact, you'll drown in information. So one thing that I think has been particularly handy and helpful for a lot of teams and people is to do what we've done in other disciplines. You imagine you used to have this, well, maybe not used to, probably still do have an email overload issue. As a point in many people's lives where they get hit with so much email, they say, wait, I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to adopt some new principles, some practices, maybe get some different tools, write some rules to manage your inbox. In a very similar way, to manage the overflow of information from the cloud, you can build a plan, be deliberate about it, and then select a set of tools and resources to help with that and rituals that you're actively managing the information flow. Because you won't get it right, and because the landscape is constantly changing, you'll need to adjust that constantly, just like everything else we do in an agile world. I can't tell you a prescriptive answer for what a good plan is for you because all your needs are very different, right? Instead, I can suggest maybe some principles I think can be useful, and you can use those to drive your decisions to then build your own plan, which is what I'm encouraging you to do, is to come up with a plan to manage this flow so you're not just a victim of it. Well, right in the middle is the whole point. Be deliberate, and that means making a plan and also deliberately updating it, because if you don't, a year from now, it might as well not have a plan because you're not actively managing it. The top principle is to don't watch everything. That one's pretty obvious. I mention it because I think it's helpful and important to remind everyone and yourselves that it's important to make active decisions on every piece of information you get. With our connected world, it's so easy to just consume and consume and consume, and you almost, it's like the boiling frog. You don't realize how much you're being taken over by it. So don't watch everything and give yourself the freedom. It's okay not to watch everything, and give yourself permission not to worry about it. The next principle that really helps is to focus but use your peripheral vision. So I'm teaching my teenage son how to drive right now, and this is kind of what I'm telling him. You steer down the road, and that's an exciting experience, as some of you certainly know. You steer down the road, you use your peripheral vision, you're taking in information even if you don't realize it. You still look around left and right sometimes, but your focus is out the window and not on the stereo or the cell phone. And when you focus, that way you can eliminate a whole lot of information and see the information that you really need to see much more importantly. And in the cloud, what this really means is if you're in a particular domain, maybe you're in cybersecurity, you're focusing on the security domain. If you're a developer working on a project, you focus on your project and the tools and services and capabilities that help support that need. Right? And that's one way of filtering out and not worrying about things that you don't need to worry about. When you do that, that's very helpful, but it, by definition, gives you a gap. And that gap is for anything that's new, because if it's new, it can't have been in your focus. In particular, new services, a lot like we saw last night, this morning, on Thursday, and really throughout the rest of the year. And so you need to have a strategy for how do you want to stay up to date for those new things. You don't have to watch everything that there is coming up about something new. You just need to see that it's there, look at it, and decide if that's important to you to learn more about it. And if not, you can move on. Outposts are pretty cool, like you just saw about them in the keynote, especially if you're running certain enterprise workloads. But most of us will never need to outpost, so you don't have to worry about that. But you do need to sort of know that it comes by. Today I saw Kendra came by, and I said, and I got lots of asterisks in my note. I really need to look and spend the time with Kendra immediately, but Outpost I don't. Finally, being service-centric is this idea that, which is enabled by the cloud. The nature of it is that services are a really nice partition boundary that you can say, like I was just implying, there are certain services you just don't care about and some that are really important to you. And so if you're interested in containers, you have a handful of services you need to be aware of there. But if you don't really need to know about quantum computing for your daily work, it's interesting, but you can carve that off, like GameLift and Lumberyard. And there are many things that may be in your center spot, but may not be. We have a whole bunch of, we have these principles here. We have this commitment, hopefully, to build a plan. So now we need our building blocks. There's a lot of resources. Yeah, be careful of the suntan now. There's a lot of resources that themselves, the number of places to look to find information is itself kind of daunting. One of the things we've done is a free community resource called the Cloud Information Overload Survival Guide, and I'll give you a link to that later. And what that is it's a single source that tries to pull together the links to the community consensus, if you will, moderated and curated set of resources and tools that you can pick from, so you don't have to look at 16 million different resources. You can just put a number of colors on your palette and work from them when you're building your plan. And these are organized in 4 major categories, and they build on each other. Training is certainly the foundation when you're learning any new technology. And Andy opened up his keynote about this as well, right? To have training as being a core piece of what you're trying to do. Once you're trained, you want to execute, you're going to be using reference sources, so that's a whole nother category. And it's amazing when you start measuring and looking at how much time you spend looking up information, for the cloud in particular. It's different than a lot of other domains. When you have hundreds of services with hundreds of APIs and limits and features, you're spending a lot of time looking up information. Things change. So now you've got your training and your reference sources. Now how are you going to keep current? There's a separate set of tools and resources and practices and behaviors that you need to do to stay current. And finally, while these first 3 categories are all about self-service, eventually you're going to hit the point where you can't solve it yourself. You need a second pair of eyes, or you need different sets of expertise. And so a more of an interactive information resource is support. So the survival guide will give you a set of resources that you can hopefully use to build your own plan. And now I'm going to run through a high-level view of what is in the survival guide, and you don't have to sort of take pictures of all the links. They're online for you. And then we're going to talk a little bit about Cloud Pegboard and a few bits about how it can help, and then specifically dive into how a very lean startup is able to leverage Amazon services to actually do a really robust, high-scale solution with very low investment. So tying back into the startup side of this. For our training resources, right out of the gate, highlight AWS training. If you're new to AWS, absolutely go there. This is a foundational resource. You may not spend a lot of time there, but you should certainly start there, use it as much as you need, and then move on. Again, Andy wrote his keynote for me apparently this morning. As you're saying today, this is really, Amazon has an incentive to be good at training, because obviously if you're not trained, you can't use the platform. So they do a pretty good job there, and it's a good hub to give you that 30,000-foot view and launch from there. After that, if you work well with videos, there's a huge library of YouTube videos, so here's the link here in the survival guide. One sort of expert tip here is be careful, right? We know technology changes a lot and fast, so look at the dates. That sometimes you can look at a video and then a lot of the information may be out of date. So when you're using the videos, just be sure that they're current. The next 3 options are all commercial training options, and there are many others, and so feel free to use whatever works for you. This is why you're helping to give you the ideas for how to build your personalized plan. These happen to be very popular and effective for AWS training, but not exclusively the only ones. They sort of bubble to the top. I probably should also mention, I'm not affiliated or compensated anyway by any of the third parties recommended in the survival guide. But these all have free trials. They're really effective, especially if you're trying to get a certification. And so the links are there, and try them out. Each one has certain different characteristics for what the type of learner you are and the type of way they present material. So you can try them out and see which one seems to fit. In the reference sources, the nature of references is there won't be a lot of original sources. You'll spend a lot of time, obviously, as you do now, on the AWS site, and that's the core source for most reference information, but not all of it. Terraform would be a glaring example, and there's others in GitHub and so forth. I'm also highlighting in this category Cloud Pegboard because I am just a tad biased, but not just because that. Cloud Pegboard is a purpose-built search engine and resource to help you manage AWS and any cloud, not just Amazon provided, but all resources you need to work on AWS. So it's a wrapper, it links back where needed, provides original information when needed. So it's a purpose-built engine that just tries to make it easier, and because that's our mission here, is to try to solve this information overload problem. And a lot of that has to do with how you access and organize information. We have an internal motto in the org, which is information architecture matters, and we really believe that. And sometimes you can do some very small things and simplify your lives by disproportionate amounts. So to stay current, this category is one where in your plan you probably want to pick all of these because they're easy to turn off if you find that they're not useful. Staying current is hard, right? That's where maybe there's more constant flow and churn of information. Again, I highlight Cloud Pegboard because it's purpose-built to help you stay current and in a personalized way. So we give you ways to set your profile for what's important to you, and then we personalize it to help you stay current. But it's not the only source, and I wouldn't even recommend using it as your only source by any means. AWS podcasts are very effective. If podcasts are your thing, then I would check them out, especially if you have a commute. One thing that's, I would say again, in the spirit of the principle of don't watch everything, you don't have to listen to every podcast that they produce. A lot of them may not be on point for you. In particular, I'd highlight there's a monthly roundup episode that's maybe 45 minutes, an hour long, plus you can play it a little bit faster. That's really good to get caught up for what's happened in the major announcements over the last month. Everyone gets lots of emails from AWS. The reason it's here, well, the Survivor guide is meant to just be a handy link, so even if they're obvious, we try to make it easily accessible. But I want to highlight the fact that, again, with the spirit of being deliberate, there's a preference center. Feel free to go and turn off, turn things on so you can see what kind of content you get, but then turn it off if you find it's not very useful to you. Part of the reason for doing that is to make sure that you remove any extra chaff so as to help to bring the signal out of the noise, because it's just too much. The last two categories here, or resources here, are maybe not as comprehensive, but I think they're really useful salt and color to the rest of your experience in trying to gather information. A Cloud Guru offers a free weekly video that's 3 to 4 minutes long, covers 3 or 4 announcements. And I find it's really useful to listen to that weekly. It's a video, but you don't have to watch it. It's only audio content, really. And at least for me, I mean, everyone has a different learning style. I learn best when I hear things more than once and from a different perspective. It's surprising how many times I hear about an announcement when I listen to this video that I've read the announcement, but now I say, oh, now I get the point and I see why that's special and where I should use that or how I should use that. So I find that useful. My expert tip here is, a lot of people don't know that there's an Alexa skill for this. And so you can just say, Alexa, ask a Cloud Guru what's new. I do this on Monday mornings. They come out around Sunday usually. While I'm working out, 3 minutes of the workout just includes listening to a wash of information, which is very useful and helps let some things sink in. And even just what they choose to highlight is itself useful information. Finally, there's a newsletter called Last Week in AWS by my pal Corey Quinn. And this is a weekly newsletter, and it captures a lot of the same information of the announcements that you might find in the previous resources, but it also captures other information like from blog posts, and it's a different view. Again, seeing what other people select to highlight is itself instructive. And Corey presents this with usually a 1 or 2 sentence summary of the article with an awful lot of snark, a little bit more entertaining than some of the other resources. Again, worth checking out. It's a free newsletter. Try it, and if you don't like it, then just unsubscribe. Same for all of these. Finally, when you need to go to support, I put a big highlight on AWS Support here. I find that a lot of people and organizations underutilize AWS Support. And so therefore, I think it's worth highlighting a little bit. There's support options all the way up from free to enterprise support. I've used them all. 9 times out of 10, when I use support, I am actually delighted with the response, not just satisfied. That's a pretty good track record for any kind of support in a tech organization. There's a bit of an art to using support effectively. This is probably fodder for a whole nother talk and blog post. But be sure to use it at the right place and time. Use it frequently enough and not for the wrong things. Don't over-escalate things. And a couple other quick pointers to get really good results. Treat people in support like they're your friend, like they're your peer, and it's the right thing to do, and you'll get better results, I find. Also, spend the time to write a really good ticket. You'll get much better results than just saying, hey, it's broken, can you help me? Okay, discussion forums. Every good technology has its discussion forums. Again, for comprehensiveness, it's listed here. It's something you definitely will be using. I don't think I need to talk about that any further. I would like to spend a little bit of time focusing on using your peers for support, because I think this is undervalued and underutilized in most organizations. This will be different depending on the size, shape, culture, and color of your organization. And when I say your peers, that could be someone on your team, on a neighboring team, or even across the other side of your organization in a wholly different division. And when you ask for support from your peers, not only do you get an answer, but you're getting some extra benefits, such as an excuse to reach out across and meet people that you haven't otherwise met and make different connections, which is good organizational health, and it's good health for you individually as well. Sometimes people find new jobs or find interesting things that way as well. There's another thing when you're reaching across to other teams, your local peers understand your context and your domain that no anonymous forum poster or AWS person knows. And so by using your peers for support, they'll probably give you, in many cases, a richer answer. There's also the other aspect of this is you learn things that you might not otherwise know, such as reaching across and someone says, oh, well, here's the answer to your question. Did you know that Bob over in this other team is working on a very similar problem? You guys should talk. Or another example, I've seen a lot of things like, hey, I have a question about how to use this internet gateway, and the person they're asking says, well, here's how to do that, but you know we're not allowed to use internet gateway here, and so in cybersecurity, have they looked at that yet? And when they get to it, they're probably going to tell you no, and so you might want to design a different way. And so that can save you potentially a whole lot of rework when you catch some of those things just because you're getting different perspectives within your organization. There are several Slack channels and Discord and even other sources that gives you a sort of an interactive kind of outlet. I don't think this is a primary support channel, but I did want to list it here because it is very effective and can be helpful. And I caution, don't try to use Slack as, well, I don't want to pay for AWS support, so I'll just use Slack. It's not for that. You shouldn't try to do it that way. But it is different, a way and modality of getting support, and it's something worth thinking about. Again, all these are, consider if they work for you or not. I would like to say that if you do use, and in particular, I mentioned their Slack channels, but this is the Open Guide Slack channel, is the one I recommend more than others. It's got really nice, smart people, and much more active than the others I've come across, at least. I would also like to say that when you're using these open channels, try to contribute a lot more than you consume. They are a community resource. And finally, for completeness, the survival guide is meant to be this consensus for the community, what works, it's dynamic. So AWS has a subreddit, which some people swear by and think is really useful. I personally don't find it useful at all, but that's why this is a personalized plan. So in all honesty, I don't use it or find it effective, but some people swear by it. So again, make your own choices. This is a palette for you to make your own painting from. All this is online. There's a Consolidate together. We got a page, which is, okay, that's bright. Sorry, guys. So this is that way you don't have to take pictures of all the different slides. You can just get the QR code. It's cloudpegboard.com/AWS. It's a curated, updated list. You can also subscribe to be notified when we do major updates to it. And please contribute to it. There are little voting buttons on it, and we're probably missing a lot of really good resources. This is a fairly new guide. I'd like to have it converge. The more people comment on it, the more effective it will be for the larger community. No, turn off the slides so I don't kill anyone else. So now I'd like to switch and tell you a little bit about how Cloud Pegboard can help you manage some of this information overload and make things a little bit less overwhelming. And then we'll dive into the architecture of how we do that. Of course, we have to have a demo. So that's my dog when she was a puppy. It was only like a year ago, and she's like 10 times that size now. She delights in drinking from the fire hose. Most of us, maybe less so, right? So Cloud Pegboard is really designed to help reduce that stress of being overwhelmed and save you time and help you stay current and make it a little bit more enjoyable, like the dog, my dog Gracie does there, instead of now when we feel like we just have this onslaught of how am I going to possibly keep up. We do this with several fundamental capabilities. There's this services table, which is essentially a catalog of all Amazon services, which is sortable, browsable, and I'll show you in a second what that looks like. We have data sheets, which is a single data sheet that has everything you ever want to know about each service in one spot. Personalized notifications, daily, weekly emails to keep up to date as things change. So that's part of how you implement the how do I know what's new and what's changing part of your strategy. Some Slack integration, and even, as you know from being attendees at reInvent, the session catalog is a bear to manage and keep track of, and so that's another information architecture problem that we've solved. Okay, well, sorry guys, it's still really bright. So because I can't scroll, this is just an example of the data sheet that I'll walk you through quickly, and I'll just zoom into some of the different sections. And this happens to be DynamoDB. You can search on the top, obviously, or link to it from our services table. So we have different sections. There's the basic metadata about the service, what it's called. It's actually kind of handy. There's the downloadable icons, so when you're building slides, you don't have to go look for them. And you can also find out the release date, especially after, like today, there's a lot of things that are announced but not actually released, that they're released but in preview, and then there's GA. So this is a place you can find that out. You have the documentation, and all in one consistent, usable place, the links to all the fundamental documentation. We even have AWS Geek, Jerry Hargrove's diagrams, which are really useful if you haven't used the service before. Yeah, we have those, and that's another example of a non-AWS data source. There's development information. Again, this is a place where you can get at a glance and see what, especially for some services, the CLI command is not always that obvious. Or you need to know what the ARN syntax is or the namespace. You can just glance at it, but of course, these are all deep linked back to the original source material. So when you click on the Boto 3 link, you get right to the place in Boto 3 for this in this case for DynamoDB, or to CloudFormation or Terraform. And if you've ever navigated any of those sites, I think you really appreciate how it can be pretty hard to find the pieces you need. There's a section on technical information, encryption at rest and in transit, and VPC, private link support. We also highlight the regions and show what regions are supported. And one of the things we do there is to personalize it. You've set your profile, what regions you care about. And so we'll highlight those so you can confirm and see that, oh yeah, the regions I care about are supported by this service. I'm not sure if you see the highlighting on the screen there. But if a region you care about is not in a given service, that'll be flagged with a big red, hey, it's missing this region. For 5,000 announcements a year, you really don't want to be watching them come flow by and try to keep up and maybe remember that you saw an announcement. So instead, we capture all the announcements, we organize them by service, so you can look at the service and then decide, and then look back in reverse chronological order at all the different announcements. We have the compliance, tips and tricks, and so the ReInvent Sessions is a really interesting piece that we've recently added, obviously since August when the catalog came out. And so here what we do is we actually use Comprehend to look at the session catalog, figure out what service different sessions correspond to, and then we hook it up to the data sheet for that session. That way, if sometime, let's say a month from now, you look at Amazon Personalized, for example, and say, oh, I really decided to use that, I wish I'd gone to some of those reInvent sessions. Well, you could actually go look, and what we'll be doing, which I think is really exciting for me, at least, is we'll be linking these to the videos when they come out in a couple of weeks. And so you'll all be able to find, directly find the videos that are relevant to the particular service. And then running up to reInvent, this was helpful to people, Cloud Pegboard users, who are able to find what sessions to choose to attend. Okay, enough of that. There's a services table, and this is just a view where you can look at multiple services at once, and so this is good for comparison. There's different perspectives, and so one of the information architecture principles we adhere to is try to filter information until you need it. So here, if you're selecting, you can look at the attributes that make sense. Like, does this service support CloudFormation? For example, Andy was talking about the 4 different container services today. Well, what's the difference between them? Some of them have different attributes that you can find in the table and help choose that way. One of the things you can do with the services table is have this notion of creating lists, and a list could be like for all the services in a given project, and that way you can line up all the services that you might need to look at for a given service. But now if you're not selecting but you're developing, you just click the developing button. And now we're looking at a different set of data that's relevant for when you're developing. And here, and I particularly like this view because what I'll do is when I'm developing, I select the rows based off clicking the service, my personalized list, in this case Project Alpha because I'm that creative. And I'll put it up on a whole separate tab, and then with that tab, I now have links to everything I'm really going to be using while I'm doing active development all in one spot. So much, much less searching. We all know the session catalog is a lot of work to find what to spend time doing during reInvent. And it's interesting, if you look at when sessions are added to the catalog, 75% of all sessions that existed by the time registration opened for the seeding on October 15th didn't exist when they released the catalog. So how are you supposed to look through the catalog every week or every day without re-reviewing the 1,000 or 2,000 sessions that you already looked at, because this is monotonically increasing over time? And in fact, it's interesting, when I froze the slide, we're at roughly north of 2,500 service sessions. Today, the catalog has 3,800 sessions in it. And so that was another information management problem we thought we should tackle to, again, make life easier, because we just really are fans of AWS and just want to make it as fun as it should be. I want to be drinking from the fire hose like Gracie and not like it's a real fire hose. So one of the things we've done is re-implement the catalog. And the key feature here is that we organize it by the date that a session was added. I mean, at least that's the default sort. You can sort it however you want. And that way, if you spent some time looking at 2,000 sessions, 1,000 sessions, and there's another 500, you can just start looking where you stopped looking before. We also do things like filter out repeats, and then you can look at the repeat sessions and scheduling information only when you're ready to schedule, once you've found what's interesting to you. All right, so hopefully that was just a quick little tour to give you some context for talking about the architecture so we know what it is that we're building. So we're fairly small right now. Okay, that's an understatement. We're very small right now, but we're growing very fast, and we intend to be serving hundreds of thousands of users pretty quickly. And eventually, if we're really lucky, millions, because that's the size of the addressable market. There's really, everybody that uses Amazon and, in fact, other clouds really have a need for this. There's no attribute that filters out some people that just don't need to look at information about the cloud, right? So we need to be able to scale fast. We need to really move as fast as all the cloud features are moving. We're very small, and we also have to be robust. So that's a pretty significant challenge for a startup. And many years ago, when I did my first startup, you wouldn't even contemplate that. It would take millions of dollars of investment. Now it's incredible how little it takes, and by leveraging the right tools and technologies. So here's the overview of the architecture, very abstract. We suck in data from an awful lot of sources. We throw it into a database. You could call it a data lake. I just avoid buzzwords. We integrate it, we connect it, and then we expose it through a web tier and a bunch of APIs. Down on the bottom, you'll see there's a section where we look at all the changes as those occur, and then when we're doing our daily or weekly updates to our users, we apply their personal preferences for each interaction with each user, and then filter according to services and other attributes so that we can give them a personalized experience and get them just the right data, what they need and when they need it. We've talked about how we're a small, bootstrapped startup that needs to scale big and can't spend a lot of time on operations and maintenance. Actually, don't want to spend any time. I want to spend all our time on features, functionality, information architecture, data quality, user experience. And so to do that, we made a strategic choice to stick with serverless 100%. And that has allowed us, we spend almost zero time on maintenance and operations. At the same time, we have enterprise customers, and that's another significant aspect of our target market, that expect us to have things like disaster recovery. Well, again, as a lean startup, I really don't want to spend time building DR plans, testing them, documenting them, come back 6 months, every 6 months, test them. And of course, when you test the DR plan, you realize that it's drifted because we've been making many releases every day. So how do you keep your DR plan up to date? So I just don't believe in disaster recovery, especially for a small startup. Instead, I believe in disaster tolerance. And so we've built an active disaster tolerance solution because we also, I believe a lot of things. In infrastructure as code, since we religiously stick with infrastructure as code, then we simply rerun CloudFormation, which is what we happen to use, and I now have 2 regions that have all the same capabilities, and so I have an active, fully region fault-tolerant infrastructure that doesn't require any operations or maintenance if I do have a failover event. There's a little bit of trick here that while it was almost 0 time to add the second region, we have to share state across, and that gets a little bit tricky. And this was an interesting story with how being current and understanding the information and focusing can help us do that and not miss opportunities. So I'll walk you through that real quickly here. Our static and our metastatic data is in S3. So first thing we do, we get a little bit of data protection, we turn on versioning in S3. That's great. Then we have cross-region replication, which is just a couple of lines of CloudFormation, which I think is just this magical thing that you throw something in one bucket. Sometimes I'll actually go and check the other region just to see that it really showed up, and it's just there. I mean, I'm easily pleased, but it really works magically, and it took no effort. Then the next thing was about a year and a half ago, because I have this principle of focusing on the technologies that I care about and that I use, one of which is CloudFront, is I saw this announcement come through about origin failover. And when you have origin failover, that's this magic new feature that will allow CloudFront to fail over to a surviving region if in the rare event, but it can still happen and has happened, where S3 in a primary region fails or the whole region gets knocked off for some reason, I'll automatically fail over to the alternate region, and when there's a recovery, I'll fail back, and I haven't done anything. There's no operations, there's not even an alert on this that I monitor. It's just going to work. Similarly for our dynamic data, we use DynamoDB. There's a very similar story you could do for RDS here. DynamoDB, again, same story as CloudFront. Because it's in our focus range, looking at that and see that it's been around for a long time, but then one day they announced global tables, which again are an amazing feature. I wish they had it sooner, but it's an amazing feature to have global table replication. Now I have true multi-master replication, so I can have writers in either region, and the alternate region will be synchronized right up to date, which works perfectly for our particular application. So again, very simple to set up, and then we also turn on standard backups as well as point-in-time recovery. Again, very simple to do with a couple of lines of CloudFormation. So you can see how we're leveraging with very little effort, we get this huge amplification to get some major features out of this. And in fact, just less than 2 weeks ago, because I watch in one of my services in my watch list is DynamoDB, one of the difficult parts of this story here, actually the most difficult part of the story, which isn't difficult at all, was global tables have to be empty when you add them into a replication group, which is really, and there's some other reasons why you get into this bit of a deadlock situation trying to set that up. We had to build some custom tooling to make that easier. If everyone's trying to do that, there's a blog post on how to get that done. But it turns out that's now moot, and it's on our backlog because 2 weeks ago, there's a new feature in DynamoDB that global table replication is really just basically another bit to flip, and it will just automatically work for you. You don't have to empty your tables. So this is how watching is keeping us, we may not be Scotty-like, but for the things that we need to know about, we're finding those little gems which are hugely leveraged in our environment. And finally, now that we have all of our data replicated across both regions, we can set up our API gateway and our Lambda functions, and then we use Route 53 with latency routing, which will automatically route traffic to the region with the lowest latency, so we get a little bit of performance boost, but then also if there's a failure, because we have these health checks, we'll automatically, again, fail over and then fail back without any interaction. Just quickly, this is a view of the backend, highly abstracted. We use a lot of Lambda functions and step functions, which is another really cool service that we didn't appreciate until started really using it, and that orchestrates a lot of our Lambda workflows. There's persistence tier, and then to interact with our users on a non-interactive basis, we use Pinpoint, which is actually not shown here, SES, we even use SNS, this is a fairly recent addition. So for reInvent now, our users have the ability to get real-time alerts when sessions are added to the catalog, such as after announcements are made in real time. That way they can sign up for these sessions before they get booked up. And so there, what we do is we just have a queue, and we post a message to the queue every time we find a new reInvent session, and our subscribers get that information instantaneously. And it turns out we will be evolving this. I think Pinpoint would have been a better solution, but this was super fast to set up, and everything we do with reInvent is usually down to the last minute. And finally, I mentioned we use Comprehend because Comprehend is how we are able to look at that session catalog, figure out what service it's talking about by doing entity extraction. We trained a library of all the Amazon service names and pull those out and then assign it. So you can see how a lean startup is able to use this vast array of services, and actually it's even more than this, to build a really robust solution that requires no maintenance and operation. So we're spending all of our time focusing on feature and functionality and information architecture. And if we had to build all these things, that would be a huge investment to build these services and capabilities. So we're able to do all this by leveraging and getting that amplification by making use of the right services and capabilities that exist. So as a lean startup, it's not how much you invest, it's the tools you choose, and then within that, the features you choose within them to make sure to leverage those. So hopefully you've got a bit of an overview of the big takeaway I hope that you get from today is that, yes, there's an overwhelming information overload, but it's manageable. You can work with it, and I just encourage you to personalize, make some plan. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as it works for you, and adjust it over time. And hopefully the survival guide is a free resource. Go use it, comment on it, and build yourself a plan and share. I'd love to hear what people think is working, not working for them. Create a plan, and then see how it goes and adjust it over time. And the gap is big, and they're racing ahead, but it's also manageable, and you can deliver some really cool and fun solutions when you have the right tools. As Andy is saying, the right tool for the job, you have to know what the tools are, and that's why it's so important to be able to manage the flow of information. And of course, if you want to use Cloud Pegboard, cloudpegboard.com will get you there as well. So thanks so much for your attention and interest, and I think I have a couple of minutes at least for some Q&A if anyone has anything. Thanks a lot.